Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a really fascinating study about how future teachers actually perceive and use spatial thinking in their everyday lives. It's a topic that touches literally everything, from our basic survival in a totally new environment, right down to the very future of our education system. So, let's see what the research actually tells us. Just to map out where we're headed today, we're going to start with the broad importance of spatial skills, zoom in on the daily navigation strategies of these future teachers, look at how human interaction and safety come into play, and finally, unpack what all of this actually means for education reform. Section 1, Why Spatial Thinking Matters. To really understand the gravity of this study, we first need to zoom out and look at why spatial awareness is so absolutely critical in the first place. It's super easy to take for granted, but it's foundational to how we operate as humans. Seriously, I want you to picture yourself dropped in an unfamiliar city right this second, completely without your smartphone. How exactly would you figure out where you are? Would you look up at the sun? Would you scramble to find a physical map? Or would you just freeze up? Honestly, it's a scenario that causes genuine anxiety for a lot of us today. And that brings us to the core concept of our explainer, spatial thinking. Basically, this is the fundamental cognitive skill that dictates how we interact with the physical world. It ranges from something as simple as navigating your living room in the dark without stubbing your toe on the coffee table, all the way up to serious mental gymnastics, like wrapping your head around how the Earth rotates on its axis while simultaneously orbiting the sun. What's truly wild is just how far-reaching this skill actually is. Yes, obviously it's essential for everyday survival, but the literature shows it also strongly predicts success in STEM fields. It literally influences what careers people choose. But the most crucial point here, and the real reason for this specific study, is the trickle-down effect. Research shows that if a teacher lacks these skills or feels anxious about maps and directions, that anxiety directly impacts their students' development. A teacher who's afraid of geography is going to inadvertently pass that exact hesitation right down to their classroom. Section 2, the pre-service study. Knowing the stakes are that high, let's zoom in on the specific academic study we're unpacking today. This research looked at future social studies teachers over in Turkey to see exactly where their spatial skills currently stand. The researchers conducted these deep, qualitative interviews with 9 fourth-year pre-service teachers, 4 men and 5 women, averaging just under 25 years old. Since they're fourth-year students, these folks are right on the cusp of entering the profession. The researchers wanted to understand their real-world spatial experiences and, any anxieties they might be carrying with them. Section 3, Daily Navigation Strategies. So, how do these future educators actually find their way around when they step outside? Let's look at their habits to see how this builds a picture of modern navigation in our hyper-connected world. This brilliantly illustrates our modern reality. Take a moment to read this quote from participant K4. She humorously but very honestly admitted a total, complete dependence on navigation apps with voice commands just to survive the city. She flat out said that without the voice telling her exactly where to turn, she just couldn't follow the map on the screen. It's a pretty stark reminder of how heavily reliant we become on our devices. But beyond just staring at a phone screen, this study revealed a fascinating and highly personal array of individual navigation strategies. Sure, using apps is naturally at the top of the list for most, but consider the mental strategies they deploy when the screen isn't enough. Identifying landmarks serves as a massive anchor point for many of them. Then there's mental positioning, which is incredibly creative. One participant actually visualizes streets in geometric shapes with an artist's perspective, almost like drawing a 3D room in their head just to remember their routes. Others rely on hyper-specific details. They might memorize a uniquely colored car that always seems to be parked on a certain corner, or a quirky shop display, just to know they're on the right path. And remarkably, even in our high-tech era, some actually still rely on nature, actively using the sun's position throughout the day to figure out east from west. The crucial point is how these strategies are actually applied in real life. Participant K1 grounds her spatial awareness by identifying specific, distinct local landmarks. She mentions using a local pastry shop and some colorful stairs as her anchors. She basically builds her entire mental map outward from those very specific, memorable spots, rather than trying to memorize rigid street names or grid layouts. Section 4, Human Interaction and Safety. But what happens when the tech fails, your battery dies, or the landmarks just aren't enough to get you there? This introduces a deeply human and often totally overlooked element of spatial navigation. This brings us to a fascinating intersection between navigation and personal safety. Participant K5 highlights a critical secondary use of spatial tech. The female participants in the study specifically noted that they rely heavily on live location sharing on WhatsApp, not just to find a place, but as a vital safety protocol. Navigating a space isn't just about geometry. For many, it's intrinsically tied to feeling physically secure in an unfamiliar environment. And when they eventually do have to ask a human for directions, they are highly selective. They don't just ask anybody. They strategically target shopkeepers because they're embedded in the local geography and know the area perfectly. They seek out police or security guards specifically to mitigate safety anxieties. And if they absolutely have to ask a random stranger on the street, the participants admitted it comes down purely to good vibes, basically quickly reading a person's body language and assessing if they look sincere and safe to approach. Section 5. The need for applied education. Finally, let's zoom back out to the macro level. What do these daily navigation struggles, the safety anxieties, and these varied personal strategies actually mean for the future of our national education system? When asked how to fix the curriculum, the study participants were split right down the middle. Some argued that spatial skills absolutely must be a mandatory course, starting from a very early age. They believe it's just too vital for everyday life and professional competency to be ignored. The other camp argued for an elective course. Their reasoning was that since everyone has different spatial abilities, an elective would allow students suffering from severe spatial anxiety to group together in a low-pressure environment and learn through peer support, rather than forcing everyone into a stressful one-size-fits-all class. But regardless of the course format, the consensus on the actual teaching method was incredibly unified, and this brilliantly illustrates the core takeaway of this study. Participant K2 advocated for an 80-20 split, favoring highly practical, active learning over dry theory. They want field trips, they want 3D modeling, they want to be actively placed in environments and asked to navigate, rather than just staring at a textbook definition of a maps legend. Ultimately, this research from the Aegean Geographical Journal issues a clear call to action for curriculum developers. It strongly urges them to integrate applied spatial education using modern, digital tools. Participants explicitly mentioned how software like Google Earth and ArcGIS totally opened their eyes and improved their visualization skills once they were finally taught how to use them. We need systemic reform to prepare a more spatially aware generation of teachers, who will in turn foster a much more spatially aware generation of students. As we wrap up the explainer today, I want to leave you with this final thought to reflect on. Did your own spatial skills develop purely by chance, perhaps by just getting lost and figuring it out on your own? Or were you actually taught how to confidently navigate the world around you? It's a question that shapes not just how we move through our cities, but how we understand our actual place in the world. Thank you so much for diving into this with me, and keep exploring.